welcome to Spooked with Emma. I'm Emma and this is part 10 of the last 6 days. There are 12 parts altogether, so if you enjoy this, please subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you can't wait for the next part, you can also buy the paperback or the ebook versions in the link in the description. When I told Julian the made-up nightmare story about the emu, he said that it was normal to have nightmares after what I'd been through, and that he had had nightmares too after Elena died. He said that he sometimes dreamed that she had survived and they were still together and that they went for walks and normal things, and then he'd wake up and remember that she was gone, and it was even worse than the first time. Then he said that other times he had weird nightmares about her being a cartoon character and drinking cartoon poison and exploding. It was really strange because he was describing the exact dream I'd just had, but how could he have known what I was dreaming? I don't think I told him. I'm sure I told him the emu one instead, but it's so hard to remember now. I thought that maybe the apartment had put the nightmare into my head somehow. I never had nightmares normally, but this place was just full of darkness and fear and sadness. Or maybe it just showed that we had some kind of subconscious connection. I didn't want to tell him I'd had the same dream, and I thought that if I told him the truth now, he'd know that I'd lied to him, or he might think I was pretending to make fun of him, so I just kept quiet. I changed the subject and said we should go out and do something and not just waste a day, especially in this apartment where things could start happening again at any moment. He said that tomorrow we would go out and do fun things, and that then I would start to feel more normal, but for now it was better for me to just get some rest and not try to do too much. He mentioned the botanic gardens again, and then he said that the Prado was a really interesting place to visit too, and suggested that we could go there in the afternoon after we'd been to the gardens. I told him that everyone in London had recommended it too, and it was the first place I visited when I got here, but it was so huge that I'd only seen parts of it. He asked me if I'd seen Goya's black paintings, and I said that I had, and that they were my favourites in the Prado, even though I found them very unsettling. I realised that after being so impressed by them when I saw them, I actually hadn't thought about them again since, but then I'd been so preoccupied by what was happening here that I hadn't really had the chance to think about anything else. I wanted to lighten the mood a bit, mainly because I'd started to feel a bit scared and on edge again. I made a joke that if Goya's paintings were a reflection of what was going on in his mind, he must have had some quite strange nightmares too. Julian told me that when Goya was an old man, he was living alone and had various health problems, and was also traumatised from years spent going into war zones to paint what was happening, and that he had basically been driven mad. He said that Goya used to paint these grotesque images directly onto the walls of his living room and other rooms in the house, and he was a recluse and had no visitors, so nobody even saw them until after he died. He just lived alone with all of that darkness everywhere he went in the house. It must have been like living in hell, and he'd created it himself. I thought that was so strange, and I couldn't imagine why he would possibly want to do that, but then it occurred to me that isn't that what I've done too? Created my own hell. I definitely hadn't done it deliberately, but I can't help thinking that I've nobody else to blame but myself. Anyway, I don't know why I keep dwelling on blame when there's nothing I can do now. I told Julian that I would like to go back to the Prado and see those paintings again, especially as he seemed to know some of the background to them. I really did want to go back, I just couldn't understand why I was so exhausted. I was thirsty, but I was too tired to get up, and before I even had enough energy to ask Julian to get me a drink, I'd already fallen asleep again. I thought I'd just closed my eyes for a second, but when I opened them again, Julian was still sitting there, but he had got a glass of water from somewhere. Maybe I had said something after all, or he just knew somehow that what I was thinking about. It was dark, and I realised I must have been asleep for quite a long time. I had been feeling so drowsy and confused all day that I wasn't sure of what time of day it had been when I fell asleep. I wondered what the time was. I could hear a clock ticking loudly, and I thought it was strange because I hadn't seen one in the apartment. I realised that it had been ticking the whole time I'd been in the apartment, but I hadn't paid attention enough to question it before. It was only when I woke up and wanted to know the time that I even thought about a clock and realised there wasn't one. I asked Julian what time it was, and he just said it was late and we would have to sleep here again. I told him we couldn't because things had happened here before, and just because it had been okay so far, there was no way of knowing what might happen if we stayed, and I didn't want us to push our luck. He just told me what he told me before, that the ghost wouldn't come back while he was here, and I should trust him. I started to feel frustrated because I wanted him to understand what had happened to me, and I felt like he wasn't taking it seriously enough. I knew I needed to get out of here, but I felt too weak to explain it to him. I was nearly crying and I told him he didn't understand and that we needed to leave, even if he had to carry me out of here, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked angry. He told me that I was the one who didn't understand and that he knew better than anyone about the ghosts in this house. I was angry too. I told him that that didn't make any sense. Nobody could ever understand what I'd been going through in this place. He told me he understood perfectly because this was Elena's apartment and she went through exactly the same thing. Suddenly, nothing made any sense anymore. Elena had lived here. A million questions came into my head, but I couldn't get any of them out. Finally, I asked him if that was why she killed herself. He spoke in a quiet voice and told me it was. He said that she'd lived here for a couple of months before she died, and the haunting had started as soon as she moved in, but she was too nervous to tell him about it in case he thought she was crazy and left her. But she'd been petrified. Every night she'd heard the sobbing and screaming, and she'd even seen the ghosts, not just their shadows. She was too afraid to sleep, and she was exhausted to the point of fainting at work on more than one occasion, and even once in the street. But she'd kept that a secret from him too. Julian said she seemed so distant and withdrawn, and nothing he did seemed to make her happy anymore, and he had started to suspect that she was having an affair. But when he confronted her, she burst into tears and told him about everything that was happening and how it was ruining her life, and he'd believed her and come here to stay with her and to try to protect her. As soon as he arrived, it all stopped, and after a while they both thought the ghost had gone and they were safe. He said that his biggest regret was that he actually started to think that maybe she had just imagined it. Anyway, he thought that whatever had been happening had stopped and it wouldn't happen again. That's why, when he had to go away on a work trip for a few days, he thought it was safe to leave her alone while he was away. They were both convinced that the haunting was over and the ghosts were gone forever. She told him she'd be fine and that she wasn't afraid anymore, but while she was there on her own, they came back even worse than before. They must have been angry that she had brought him here to protect her, and they took their revenge while she was alone and vulnerable. She hadn't been able to explain to him exactly what had happened, but whatever it was, it had driven her completely out of her mind and she had poisoned herself. When he got back from his business trip, she was still alive, but it was too late to save her, and he waited with her to take care of her until the end. So she died in this house, I asked him. He said yes, that she had died here in bed, the bed I was lying in. As soon as I heard that, it started to feel different. I could almost smell death around me, and I knew I shouldn't be here. I asked him why he didn't take her to hospital. He said it was already too late when he got to her, and she didn't want to die in hospital with so much noise and doctors and nurses rushing around everywhere. And she especially didn't want to see the looks on the faces of her colleagues when they saw her. She just wanted him to stay with her, and she was in so much pain that she couldn't stand to be moved anyway. She was constantly crying and moaning, begging him to just kill her to stop the pain. Later, she started hallucinating and would talk to people who weren't there and talk to him about things that weren't happening, and he just went along with it because he didn't want to cause her any more distress. He told me the days he spent with her before her death were the worst of his life. In the end, she didn't have the energy to talk or even cry, and then all he could do was hold her hand, a hand that didn't look or feel like Elena's hand anymore, until eventually she slipped away. He told me that the experience had traumatized him so much that he hadn't been able to go to work or even leave his house for weeks. He felt like he had failed her because if he'd just stayed with her like he had promised to, then she would have been fine and nothing bad would have happened to her. He said that I was the first woman he'd spoken to since Elena's death. He wasn't interested in meeting anyone new yet, but something had drawn him to me in the cathedral. Then when we were having lunch and I told him about the ghost, he instantly knew that I must live in the same apartment. And he felt like he was being given a second chance to make things right by saving me. It was all too much for me to take in. Why would he risk coming back here after what had happened? He didn't even know me. Why would he put himself through this to try to save me? But I felt comforted to know that someone really understood this. I was convinced that as long as he stayed here, I would be okay. But I knew that to be truly safe, I still needed to get out of here. And I couldn't do that until I managed to get some rest so I could have the energy to get out. With all the thoughts in my head after what Julian had just told me, I doubted that I would manage to fall asleep again. But of course I did.